Hello, and welcome to the second ever movie review special of a Poisons and Pestilence podcast. We're doing The Rock with Stephen Johnson. As ever, this show is entirely unscripted, believe it or not, and while we do our best, in the flow of things, we'll sometimes make mistakes and miss things out. So do get in touch if you think we've committed any of those two sins against the history of biological and chemical weapons and warfare. But for now, all that's left me to do is to say to sit back, relax, and enjoy. So Steve, it's wonderful to have you on the show today for our second ever movie review special thing that we're doing. We had Saskia for the first one, and I think she did a fantastic job. Before we get into it, why don't we talk a little bit about you, who you are, and how you found your way into the CB world, as it were. Sorry, before you start, Steve, for the benefit of the listeners, as this is an audio-only show, as Steve delivers this, just bear in mind he's currently stroking a dog which is sat on his lap. I'm not going to say Bond villain. What type of dog is that, Steve?
It's a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel.
King Charles Cavalier Spaniel. So it's a different vibe to Bond villain, yes. But it certainly adds a level to this introduction, which I'm very much appreciating. So, Steve, your journey.
It's for the modern Bond villain. So it was by accident, really. I joined the army in about 1996, and I was posted to a unit called 33 EOD, a bomb disposal regiment, and initially it was on what they call a gap year commission. Now, there's not a lot you can do with a gap year student in a bomb disposal regiment, so I was sort of sent off to go and do research for operations and things. And one of the first things I was sent off to do was to go down to Porton Down to research something that later became known as Op Abbott, which is where they had to clear old World War I chemical weapons that had been found on a range, ironically, at the Sea Bren School. And I found it so interesting that sort of stained me really for the rest of my life, that even when I try and get back out and think, no, actually I'm a forensic scientist, I got dragged right back in. So, and after that, went into the army, left the army to go into academia, then I've currently come back into the army again, but I'm still also at the university, and then just because the weekends need filling up as well, became a special constable in the Wiltshire Police Force as well.
So Op Abbott, not to date you, Steve, but roughly when was that?
So the recce for it, so the initial planning was in 1996, but for those of you with long memories about previous governments, that was famously when we then had a change of government, and it was going to be quite a big clear operation, so it was then delayed. I think it was finally completed, and I wasn't part of the final clear up in 2000. And the initiation of the operation was bizarre, because if you can imagine a school where people are training about what they might do if Sea Bren happens, they used to get people to dig trenches in Sea Bren equipment on their Sea Bren instructors course. And as they were digging this trench, the spade went dink, dink. And went, how unusual. The instructors have actually put real chemical weapons in the soil for us. And so it was the best accident you could ever have, because they found a chemical weapon, but they were wearing Sea Bren equipment when they found it, which that's probably not a frequent occurrence on a course. So so that was, so just cleared Winterbourne Gun, quite interesting.
Because of course I think it was Project Clean Sweep around that time or just after, which was the airfield stuff. I think that one was for contamination, but then there was also, I think since then we've also seen, because it was distributed storage of CWs during the Second World War, wasn't it? So these things turn up sometimes.
That's right.
So we're going to The Rock, Steve.
Thank you so much. I appreciate, the honour of being given The Rock.
Alcatraz, The Rock.
This cell block housed the most awesome scum in America.
No other prison in history was more carefully constructed to make escape impossible.
What's the matter, fellas? Something wrong with the tour?
The tour's over, Bob.
But now, the only way to stop the unimaginable
I'll come straight to the point. 81 civilians are under my control as of this moment. A battery of VX gas rockets is presently deployed to deliver a highly lethal strike on the population of the San Francisco Bay Area.
is to get the one man who broke out of the rock.
Oh, I have a unique knowledge of this prison facility. I was formerly a guest here.
To lead a chemical weapons specialist and a team of Navy SEALs to break back in. From Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, the producers of Top Gun and Crimson Tide, and Michael Bay, the director of Bad Boys, Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, Ed Harris. This summer, get ready to rock.
I mean, I've watched this a few times over the years. I watched it when you first sort of agreed to come and talk about this, and I love the film. It's Sean Connery is Sean Connery the whole way through. He's absolutely banging.
Superb.
Of course, Nicolas Cage drives me insane, but despite that, I still had a great time. I watched it again last night just to refresh my memory on it. So let's begin. Tell me about The Rock and your relationship with The Rock over the years as a film. Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the film which has launched 1,000 clips at the start of CBRN training courses, because you see it a little bit less now. There used to be a point where best practice in training was start with a video, and little clips out of that would be great on the CBRN courses, because it was this great popular culture film which has got CBRN in it. Not hugely common for CBRN to be included in films at that time, and especially not in something that became such a blockbuster. It falls into that category, and I was trained as a tank officer. It doesn't inspire, I think, quite the same level of hatred as other sort of military or sort of technical films might do for people within that trade, because I think within the first few moments, if you're still watching after a few moments in, you've already decided just to go along for the ride. And you are not going to be one of these people going, well, that wouldn't happen. And yeah, no, that's going to take 5 forms and 26 days. So they're just, it's just one of those delightful romps where you have willingly suspended your disbelief, because shock horror, a film about someone reverse breaking into Alcatraz to release hostages from Special Forces recon Marines who've got VX rockets, is not actually a true film. So I've always enjoyed it from that perspective, but you're right, it polarizes some people because it presses really hard on buttons which some people in the CBRN community really trigger, and probably, in my mind, the one which just gets hit again and again and again is saying things like sarin gas, nerve gas, VX gas. And I think I'm old and fat enough now that I'm like, yeah, well, I'm just pleased you're saying VX. So that's okay. The other bits are in there. It's also, and I've, should have done the research on what research they did within it. It's such a confliction, because there are some bits in there where they're talking quite technically, and clearly someone has done some research, but have got it incredibly wrong. So you're like, this is in a time really before the internet. Someone has spoken to someone who has said some technical words, and yet you have got it completely the opposite of where everything should start. So, for me, I think the only thing that ever really triggers me in the whole of the film, which I've never really seen other people talk about, is, have you ever spotted the one thing missing? Maybe 2 things missing, but definitely one thing that's absolutely missing from the team that assault The Rock. as in to go and rescue the hostages and defuse the VX rockets. What's obviously missing that, films like Outbreak and Contagion, it's a really obvious thing. You see it loads.
Well, I was going to make the joke about shaving Sean Connery, but I was going to say The Mask. I won't make that joke.
It's a tough point with us because we've allowed beards in the army now.
Won't make that point. We're not a controversial show. We'll leave that one just hanging there.
It is related to beards. They deploy and they don't take any respirators or detection equipment with them at all.
No, they don't. They have the little they have their scuba gear.
They do. Famously not okay for Sea Bren.
No. So that was, there's also no mention of it as well. The technical guy does not even raise it as a point, does he?
No, but I mean, they start in their phenomenal super duper Sea Bren PPE while they're busy diffusing aid packages, which perhaps is where we should start at the beginning.
Yeah, let's start there. So there's several beginnings. So of course the fact that the US was storing VX in rockets in 1995-6 when this was made, the US was still destroying stocks. I don't have a technical expertise to talk about munition types that they'd had at that point and the level of disassembly and how they were taken apart. But even as a non-technical expert on that, I don't think they were in that particular configuration. But we'll get back into that later on in terms of the types of missiles they had and how they were stored and how they were put together. Yeah, I should say we have this introduction to the CB technical expert who, ironically, seems to be in a quite well-financed department, twiddling his thumb the most of the time. Now, of course, that's the one thing that, of course, is completely accurate in the entire film. Of course, we know overfunding is a constant problem in this area. And it's just, I think that's
just and this is the beauty of a film like The Rock. Everyone can take something different away from it. So I think if you're European, you look at that and go, what? Your entire job is just doing that? No, I don't think so. And you're allowed Nerf guns in a lab? If you're American, you're probably thinking, our lab's not big enough. Only 2 people? That's not right. Because of the sort of inconsistencies on funding levels and other components. But you're right, within the timing of it, I'd say around post-2001, there were probably a lot of officers like that because a huge amount of money poured into improving Sea Bren capability, perhaps without quite the same commensurate level of threat. And so it was a strange one. But for me, with that aspect, there was this lovely combination of, I think he describes himself as a biochemist.
Yes.
And it's this, and now I know some FBI biochemists, and I know 1 or 2 who are actually really good at weapons as well. But it is relatively unusual to have someone who is a scientist also do the bomb disposal. So it's like, hey, I'm a biochemist. Well, in which case, step away from the rocket, please, because the main thing about the rocket is the explosive bits. So we'd like you to not be near those because we're thinking you're probably not as good at the rockety bits. And the film massively dials down the difficulty of bomb disposal. So shout out to all my EOD homies who probably go, the thing about the Rock is we wouldn't let a Sea Bren nerd anywhere near a bomb. Which is a pretty fair point. Sea Bren are advisors to EOD in an instance like that. They are not, you don't send forward the DSDL scientists going, there you go, mate, could you just take that one apart?
Also, the fact is, my idea is, well, you've never seen this before. Just good luck. I mean, we've not seen this before. It's inside a baby. So, a doll. So just knock yourself out, work it out as you go. There was no suggestion as well that they'd x-rayed any of it before it went in, because of course it was just this mystery surprise that they found.
Yeah, so that lovely screening bit. So, I mean, so many questions throw up on that bit from a Sea Bren perspective. First of all, I clearly, and I love Michael Bay, and I think I've seen you in Epic Rap Battles of History, sort of the best directors, sort of.
You did. It was powerful.
Because he has not burdened his conscience with working out the backstory of quite how an aid package from Yugoslavia ends up in an FBI office in the US. Clearly, someone was like, you know what, this doll and aid package is a bit suspicious, but I don't know why, because I haven't x-rayed it or done anything. I'm going to send it internationally potentially containing a chemical agent because I've sent it to a chemical agent lab in order for them to take it apart in a secure facility. You're like, yeah, I mean, it may come as a surprise to many of your listeners, but generally speaking, if we think we've got something which might be really dangerous, we try not to travel with it too far, So then there are the other questions within there. When I watched it again last night, I was trying to work out what they really thought it was, because in order to create the tension, you had the sort of, he plays with a doll, which is point number one within it. Just from a technical perspective, you don't have, if you've got two people dealing with something, you don't have both of them touching everything. You usually have someone who does the touching and then someone who stays clean and like hands stuff to them. So that's a sort of a minor niggle point within it. The second point within it is that you would very, very quickly sack your colleague who liked playing with all the toys as you were going through it. So as they're going through this very serious component of going through this stuff, the concept that your colleague would pick something up, a doll, point it at you and start, oh, look at this, hello. Like, even if we don't think this is CBRN, you're an idiot. Please don't do that. So there we go. But then you have this strange bit where Michael Bay has gone, well, I need to create tension. So we'll have this gas, but he has very quickly realised that CBRN can look a bit boring. And maybe someone said to him, yeah, well, in about 15 to 20 minutes, they're going to start spasming. And he went, I'm going to need more.
He's got the locusts in there as like the canary in the room.
Oh, yeah, all the cockroaches. I'm like, yeah, it's like,
they didn't use an actual canary. Maybe that would have just been too grotesque, because you can see people suffering in films like this, but never animals.
Let's find something which is famously resilient to any kind of environmental effect. It's like, stick some cockroaches in there. Yeah, why? Why don't we? What about mice rats? No, they're cute. That's not the way we want to go. Might be more realistic, but no. So yeah, I mean, back to the point, high tech lab, but like the sensors are animals. Just a bit weird. But then he has the famous, corrosive. All of the chemical warfare agents he uses are incredibly corrosive.
And corrosive when exposed to air, seemingly. So they didn't corrode the plastic components. Because it was I think it was it binary? They were saying it's binary sarin in that one as well. There was like
they said binary a lot.
Yeah,
but it was so you simultaneously have this spray of sarin apparently.
Yeah,
but then I think maybe it's just corrosive. But then they're in a race to diffuse it because it's full of explosive. But then it's also mixing, so you can see there's chemicals mixing in there as well. So you're like, well, what was the gas then that came out? So this is a very elaborate attack.
I mean, so it's 3 stage. You've got you have the initial spray, then you have the gas, then you have the main payload explosion. So, and of course, the corrosiveness is interesting. Of course, notoriously, you don't want a highly, if you're going to make a nerve agent such as sarin, it's sitting in things for a long time. And so, in fact, much of the work was done in stabilizing these things was to ensure,
they wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, the sort of the straight out mythbuster is, sarin doesn't melt PE, but
if in the 1990s you're still struggling to design PPE that can deal with the 1940s, probably one of the most widely stockpiled nerve agents, not ideal.
Yeah, wouldn't be awesome. I mean, from the nerdy perspective on it, you get acids in agents, usually as contaminants. You want to try, as you say, you want to try and get rid of them because they, or when people had stocks, you want to try and get rid of them because they destabilize, and actually, they end up neutralizing the agent that you're trying to produce in those cases from a synthesis perspective. But even though some of those are particularly nasty, they don't react quite as fast as that, quite that sort of way. So I wondered whether from the binary components, and I sort of did a double check, whether the binary components could even possibly be considered to be corrosive. Naps, they can't. So pure Hollywood. That is the unsurprising one to everyone.
The other big thing, of course, was waiting for the water spray, wasn't it? That was the other tension in that scene, was the waiting for the water spray to start. And also, I love the favourite thing about their vacuum system was that the vacuum worked by guaranteeing that if you were the person working on it, it sucked it straight up.
Stop in your face. Yeah.
He put him into a sarin wind tunnel. Is that the... Yeah, so that was excellent.
It was a Crystal Maze style, start the fans, please. You're like, this is a terrible design. If only someone had considered something like, I don't know, laminar flow or maybe a fume hood. I don't know, maybe that would have been a better way of approaching this. But outside of sort of, and this would have been a better question for Saskia, outside of like the fire facilities, I don't think I've ever seen a chemical facility that goes, yeah, what we're going to do is rather than having a fume hood or a containment box, what we're going to do is put people inside it in the room as well, and they're just going to wear the PPE as well.
And as they're dealing with explosives, mixed explosives in that fume, you want it glass, just pure glass. You want nothing,
loads of glass and sharp, cutty things.
Yeah, nothing to vaguely dull an explosion. You want it exposed. I guess because it increases the sense of seriousness for the people working in that space.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's a good motivator.
Yeah, you want people to be able to see what's going on there as well. So yeah, the water deluge thing is an interesting bit as well, because
dilution is a solution, Steve.
You know, it's probably the first water deluge system I've ever seen which requires like demand flow as opposed to having like a reserve tank that just dumps. But you know, you're already down this path of, well, how unrealistic is it? Well, we wouldn't have done any of those things. We wouldn't have had that system. But like, if you're like, well, you know, the general rules in decontamination that you try not to use water if you can help it, or liquid, because you increase the amount of overall contamination. And it's like this sort of tipping point with any kind of hazardous chemical, which is that you shouldn't start with water, but if you're going to use water, you need to use a lot of water because you need to get it away. And very sadly, you see it with corrosive attacks, where if someone uses a little bit of water, they can actually just end up smearing it everywhere. So like if you deluge, you've got to really deluge. But of course, this sort of brings us into the iconic and then sort of callback theme within the film, which is the injection of atropine into the heart with a needle, which for the medics out there will go, that needle is not going through your chest bone.
Initially, I wasn't sure if this was, I didn't know it was going to be a thing in the film, right? I didn't know. I was like, maybe, and my only annoyance was like, so you've got yourself your really high, your suit to keep the sarin out. And once that's coming in the sarin, you're then going to put a needle through it into your heart.
And scoop some of that agent and get it to the heart.
I mean, that guy was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not that fair play. He's got no idea. Don't do it. Absolutely not helpful.
Yeah. So I'm pretty certain I'm going to get this massively wrong, because even if I do manage to puncture my own heart, I'm not sure I'll be able to press the lever. Yeah. So.
Well, especially because by the time, assuming how corrosive the nerve agent was depicted, it would have melted through the injector anyway. By the time it got
the gorgeous selectiveness of it, the foresight of making the heart atropine injector was clearly resistant to any kind of chemical in order to be able to be intact, right? But the sort of the double hit there is you wouldn't, not you know, again, I'm not a pharmacist, so I'm sure there are things where there are reasons why you might want to inject something into the heart. But the atropine, as ever, is one of these chemicals which people associate, quite rightly, with chemical weapons countermeasures. But it only acts against one part of the involuntary spasm, which is, generally speaking, I'm not going to use the term because I always get them the wrong way around. Muscarinic, I think, the involuntary movement of outer limbs. It doesn't work very well for things like respiration. So of all the places you might want to inject atropine, like injecting it into the area in the system where it won't actually affect the nicotinic mechanisms, it's completely bizarre, which is why medical countermeasures are not just atropine for things like VX and sarin. They are a combination of atropine plus something which counteracts and restarts the autonomic system. So otherwise you end up not being able to breathe. Kind of makes sense. So Yeah, and then even on those, like, you don't inject it into the heart, you inject it into your thigh. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The other one is it's a big needle usually, for a couple of reasons. One, because you're trying to get a lot of material in quickly, and also in order to get it deep into the muscle and past, protective clothing and other things. So I've spoken to some people who have used auto injectors, either accidentally or intentionally, in the past. If you do it while you're standing up, you fall over very quickly.
I bet.
So mainly because you give yourself an instant dead leg.
Which
is why you're always taught to lie down before you administer it to yourself, because otherwise you save yourself from the nerve agent and knock yourself out as you fall over.
Would atropine normally be administered, so you say through clothing, but if you were covered in something, would that usually, I guess it'd be very rare that you'd ever be covered in, just so saturated in the stuff and still alive that you would.
I mean, it's a pretty bad day where you go, I can't find a clean spot. So I've been wading up to my waist in agent and there is literally no clean spot to use, at which point, again, it's probably better to get the countermeasure in and just roll with it at that point. It's designed to, the auto injector systems are designed to go through a couple of layers of clothing, because you would normally wear your normal combat clothing and then your CBRN clothing over the top. And the only real other guidance you're given usually is just be careful, because you often have pockets in that area, that you need to make sure you're not trying to inject it into something in your pocket, because otherwise it could stop the needle going all the way through. But you'll know if it hasn't gone in, because you're
self-correcting that one.
You'll still be able to feel your leg. Yeah. So
that was a wonderful scene. And then from there, I can't actually remember the timeline, whether or not the heist bit comes first or after the scene with the. I think the scientist is introduced afterwards.
I think you're right. I think it might come. Yeah. Well, I mean, so let's acknowledge that even though we've seen it within the last 24 hours, we can't remember the order of it. The heist scene. Again, things you spot in the film. Michael Bay really loves things plugging into and being unplugged from things, and quite a large amount of dry ice appearing all over the place. So it was delightful to see that the VX rockets were stored in cryogenic containers, because standard. And again, it's one of these bits that hits this kind of, well, if you can afford it, there's a kind of cleverness to keeping temperatures down, because it reduces the risks of vapors and other things as well. We don't really have to Google too hard to see many images of how rockets are usually stored to go. They're not usually cryogenically frozen, because quite a lot of expense, and a lot of stuff that can go wrong there as well. But that's where we're sort of first introduced to the glowing green VX, which again is quite a trigger for a lot of people about the colour.
There's a perversity to this, because frangible chemical weapons, as I say, chemical weapons stored in glass, actually does has a precedent. So certain pulmonary agents, I think Japanese use frangible glass grenades. If you go into some of the old World War II military dies, you can see at least sort of test or conceptual models for frangible chemical grenades. How did they get the VX into the sphere? Anyway, we haven't got time. To go to. So
there's so many questions. Well, in the sphere constellation, like that's that kind of sort of the elegant pearl string constellation is. So again, people get a little bit triggered by that. Like the fact that it's full of glass, you're like, okay, I get that. But to your point, like frangible containers, including in binary systems, is a thing. But it's kind of been crossed over with a load of other things. That kind of structuring of containers within it is not dissimilar to bomblet style configurations, which did look a bit like that. But they weren't glass; they were metal, and they had their own little fusing system to break them open, and a way to fill them, as you sort of so rightly put out, as opposed to, all of a sudden, in my mind, in the Michael Bay universe, there is the trade of sort of chemical weapons glass blower, which is, there are very few universes, I think none anymore. We used to have one at Cranfield where you had academic glass blowers whose job it was to make specialist glassware, and you're like, well, I don't think we can have a CW program anymore because we don't have the glass blowing technology.
Because of course, if you Google biological cluster weapon, you get a picture of, I think it's a high, I don't think it actually was developed, like there's this classic image of like a biological cluster munition rocket, which has got a cross section through it with lots of little metal bomblets in it. But again, they're metal. So that's when we first get to see the missiles. So these missiles, I know nothing about conventional munitions really, and so I was still trying to get my head around what these are supposed to be, what these rockets are.
Again, and it's been almost as interesting looking at how people comment on the rock as it has been actually watching the rock itself, because there's plenty of people within our community that say with absolute confidence and certainty something which is actually entirely correct. People get very stirred up about, well, you don't put chemical weapons on rockets. Yeah, I mean, everyone has put chemical weapons on rockets. You had chemical weapon programs pretty much. There were rockets in the Iraqi program. The Americans had rockets. I'm pretty certain the Russians definitely did. The argument was with some of these smaller systems, well, what's the point with that? You're just denying a bit of ground. With so many of these things, the way in which people tended to deliver agents was based on what their main effect would have. And with something that was quite persistent like VX, it was absolutely something which was used to deny certain areas. So the material would become unusable. So something you might use on a logistic area or across particularly sensitive or unique equipment. Because having done that, you won't be able to decontaminate it very easily. Actually, this sort of obsession with, the rocket's got to be really good at vaporizing it so that people can inhale it really well. Well, that's like spending a long time developing a chemical that's incredibly thick and persistent, and then going, well, now I'm going to build a delivery system that completely counteracts all of those properties that it's got. I think people get a bit over the top about the rocket component. It's just another way of dispersing it. Some of the systems were good, some were bad.
Because, of course, I think one of those things, it is technically challenging to achieve very strategic high levels of broad dispersal. That's a very technical task, and it requires a lot of expertise. But, of course, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, if you're developing something like the Sarin rockets we saw, or we still see occasionally today, they tend to be, rupture packed. They produce a thick oil that comes out. It's clumsy, it spreads. It's not necessarily a fine vaporized cloud. It doesn't need to be. But of course, we start from overtechnical. So VX, of course, notoriously is not really known for being a vapor issue.
No, incredibly difficult to detect because, it shares in some ways quite similar detection challenges to things like mustard agent, where below, certainly in a lot of sort of European winters, it's incredibly difficult to detect because there's very little vapor above the liquid. Which again, it's not really. It was never really designed into VX. It was just happened to be the properties of the chemical and selected, and then has had an effect of a challenge. But so
persistent droplets was the aim of it mainly.
Yeah, easy to spread around, and also because of that difficulty to detect, easy to spread. So if you're wearing protective clothing, you might have it on you and then spread it to somewhere else as well. But unlike mustard agent, where you could spread a lot of contamination without being aware of it, there is a self-limiting factor with a highly spreadable nerve agent, which is you don't have long to spread it before it becomes obvious you are contaminated.
So I assume over the years you've seen a couple of the similants of these things in terms of the physical characteristics. So I think when we had somebody on the show previously, they basically said, look, there's different. It's almost like different types of oil, like machine oil, olive oil. Good looking at different types of agents. So VX, typically, what would that look like if it was in a small vial and didn't eat through it? Obviously, it's incredibly acidic.
So with most of the OP chemicals, they generally speaking, if they are produced at very high purity, are pretty much clear. But we usually say with VX that it would have a pale straw-like colour to it. Fluorescent green, not really the thing. And in terms of consistency, engine oil is usually one that's often described. I sort of think engine oil is a nice one, but I tend to think, particularly with agents that were deliberately thickened with polymers as well, a little bit more like syrups or treacles, because you get stranding. And when you are working with these things, the stranding effect from it can be quite problematic, because you might not see the strand, but you've got this sort of, imagine trying to work with chemical candy floss, as it were, and it's sort of bits are getting everywhere, but you can't see it. Whereas Sarin, by comparison, petrol water is quite a good sort of similarity to it. We usually talk about it in terms of persistency. If you poured some water on the ground, Sarin would disappear at about the same time as the water would disappear in terms of evaporating normally. But yeah, all of this is sort of couched into the other caveats of it wouldn't necessarily completely disappear. Some soaks into the environment, things like that as well. But yeah, engine oil versus petrol is probably a good comparison.
Let's get back to the plot. So the plot is you have the general who is very annoyed, and interestingly, the way he's framed is that kind of trope of the kind of dastardly genius that has a soul, that has a heart. Because first of all, you start the film almost with the big pomp and ceremony of the US military and the fallen heroes and all that, and he's tied to that. So it's this idea that you have some sympathy with his plight, and indeed that's a kind of key through line through the FBI agents certainly seem to. A couple of guys in the military really don't like him, and that's also made very clear. But generally speaking, he's kind of seen as this, he's got his vision of what he wants, and he's going to go about it in a completely horrific way.
Yeah, he has. It's an interesting military backstory for him. Not to say that it's unrealistic. I've never been in that world at all. But to this person who misses his wife, so he's clearly going through some sort of widow's remorse, and trying to deal with it, and clearly a natural follow-on from losing your wife is to take 81 people hostage with VX rockets to hold the government to account for. And this is the incredible. You could get an ethics professor on it to go through the ethics of this, of being deeply upset about the fact that the US government is not recognizing the deaths of Marines who are used in illegal operations to extrajudicially kill foreign nationals in their own countries. It's like, and we should be talking about that more. And these people should have a place on the wall and a proper pension plan. It's like, I'm not really sure you're understanding the concept of covert operations from this perspective. There's that lovely scene where it's like, we lost this many people in China. It's like, we've never invaded China, which is, probably one of the few true things that are said in the entire film. It is, we've never formally recognized we were in South China. It's like, what's going on here? It's also very unrealistic that a brigadier would actually know anything about chemical weapons, because they generally
because they don't actually have. These guys seem very competent with programming and launching missiles, but there's no. I don't recall them actually having any reference to them having an internal VX expert. He's just, because he's a brigadier general, you trust him. He knows what he's doing with this stuff.
It's a weapon. He can turn anything into a weapon. If it's a weapon already, he's halfway there. So it's sort of. So there's some sort of strange bits there. They again, Steve's annoyance about a lack of respirators is like, and I'm not saying that military people wouldn't be like this, because they absolutely are at times. But if you turn around to me and said, "Hey, Steve, we did a nighttime raid on a marine secured chemical weapons facility full of VX in incredibly fragile glass balls. Awesome. What have we got? Well, I've got tranquilizer darts. Okay, that makes sense. We've got night vision. Yeah, that is good too. Anything else? No, I think we're good. respirators. Oh, don't be rubbish, Steve. They don't look cool. Can't see your face. That's no good for the movie. Just go in there. What could go wrong? Well, mate, you could get trapped in there and your face melts off. That's what could go wrong. So in their world of VX, face melting VX, I would really, really want to wear that respirator.
Of course, perhaps forgivable, because in their world of VX eats through pretty much anything it wants to selectively.
What's the point of the respirator, Steve? Call yourself a Seabrain expert. You didn't even know that.
They had these rockets. Rocket types are interesting. They seem to be guided.
The smallest guidance chip in history.
I think was it 15 or something they had of those. At this point, we start to get the statistics, by the way, that we were going to have to deal with, of the amount of VX there was and the spread and danger of it. And so let's talk a little bit about that. And the idea was the lethality would come if they if it was dropped, if it exploded at height over a submarine area, which of course we know that's exactly what, if you do these high level or reasonably high level explosions of nerve agent weapons over areas, that's what was an aim of these things, to create a spread, primarily to ensure area denial along the lips, not necessarily to kill everyone in mass space, but with the X, but there were some big numbers thrown around.
There were some big numbers. 70, wasn't it? Is he 70,000? So probably not. not per rocket. It depends how much is in there. But I mean, it's fair to say that you're talking, milligrams as a lethal dose for something like VX in an ideal situation.
Yes, yeah.
So it becomes much like the much vaunted, I think, was it the Colin Powell press conference where he had the little vial and said, if this is full of anthrax, then there's nothing here to kill everyone, in the world. Yeah. So, but if you give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, let's imagine that is true, and that they can perfectly administer this dose to everyone within that area, rather than some of it just floating away because height, explosion, all this sort of stuff as well. Then let's say it's 70,000. Well, then that would suggest that each one of those little balls was about 70 grams of agent, I guess.
They're about golf ball size, aren't they?
Yeah, they're about golf ball size. So okay, kind of sort of see where he's coming from with this. But the reality is we tend not to measure when we're considering the risk that are posed by different weapons. We don't really do it like that. We look at how big an area that could be spread, and then we look at the chance that you then inhale or are in contact with enough material in that area to receive a lethal dose as it goes through. So, the problem with that concept that this amount of material can be so effectively spread is slightly to your point. If you do it at a high altitude in order to try and get the area spread, well, then actually there's a very high chance a lot of it will just flow away or blow away. And if you've sort of got too small a droplet, it's not going to fall to Earth. So it's got to be a big enough droplet to fall to Earth. The moment it becomes a big enough droplet to fall to Earth, it's not, you haven't got it into like milligram sized droplets. It's bigger than that. So you're not really efficiently spreading it. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say 70,000 myth busted. Unless it's 70,000 people packed in a sort of 100 meter by 100 meter square, looking up with their tongues out, waiting to sort of receive their nerve agent. So yeah, not really convinced by that one, but it's a good number. And also, it sounds much better to say 70,000 people will die rather than what in reality a scientist or advisor would say, which is, depending on the time of day, weather conditions, and the actual trajectory of the weapon system, then we're going to need 3 weeks of modelling to come up with an inconclusive answer where we'll recommend further modelling and research in order to tell you that basically try and keep more than 400 metres away from it.
There wasn't much consideration of the wind or anything like that in the dialogue, I think it's fair to say.
Not at all.
But no. Of course, they weren't aiming necessarily for numbers, so that might be forgivable. It does its communicative job either way. No, so other things in that film that stand out for you in terms of you say you've got an EOD background.
You don't diffuse the payload first. It's difficult. It's difficult really to. You don't really need an EOD background to go that if you have got the thing with the energetic material and they could like ignite at any point or could be quite unstable attached to the thing, which is also dangerous but is not really going to do a great deal unless you muck around with it. You usually get rid of the rocket bit first of all, and if you knock around on the internet a bit, you'll find plenty of examples of people that think they're EOD experts who have volunteered to go and do ordnance clearing and stuff. And rockets is usually something where they go wrong because they fixate on the explosive component, which in some sorts of munition is absolutely the right thing to do, like mines. But with rockets, what we don't want is a situation in which the rocket engine starts and now we have a VX rocket inside our room zooming around, and anyone from the EOD community or the demilitarization community that's listening to this will probably have at least one story where they're like, oh, yeah, that has happened to someone. Because it's a bit alarming to have a rocket winging around in a room. Not a great way. So they really just remove the rocket component aspect of this in there, even though that would probably be one of the riskiest and tricky bits about that. So, so that would be a key part of it. The big thing was the guidance system, wasn't it? So that was they took a chip out. That was rendered them unusable. So, do the guidance ship thing. I mean, again, I love the fact they went for the guidance ship, good belt and braces, but rockets are quite fragile things, really. So you could just have given it a good kick, smashed it with a hammer. Especially given how fragile the rest of it was. But in a lot of demilitarization of chemical rockets, and people will have seen a lot of the stuff in Syria. If it's quite thin-walled material and that, then you can run it over. There's some stuff which doesn't work that way. So there have been plenty of demilitarization missions that have occurred in history where people have gone, oh, this is easy, just run over with a tank, and it's still there. Still there afterwards going, this is annoying. But so they're not great from the EOD perspective. And again, EOD officers are great people. Some of them are pretty highly qualified as well. Generally speaking, not with PhDs in biochemistry. Though, like I say, I know of at least one who absolutely is. That was bizarre. The concept of manually disarming it, that's not an unusual concept, but it's usually what we call a high consequence issue. So, which is probably fair to say in that scenario was high consequence. So, you don't try to manually diffuse something if you can do a safer approach to disarming it. Can you just destroy the guidance system, for example, or which he kind of does as a sort of way forward, but would there be a way of doing that which didn't involve having to take the payload out very carefully, give it to a very nervous looking Sean Connery, and then sort of take the chip out and put it back in?
Which is the only time in the entire film where Sean Connery shows any fear, which is the one where he's holding this thing.
All of a sudden he's taking Nicolas Cage seriously, which I don't think anyone else does through the rest of the film, including the audience. Cut me a little slack here, Sean.
I was reading the notes on this, and he said he took that because many had argued before they didn't take it very seriously. He did very serious roles, so he did this one as a more kind of...
as in Nicolas Cage said that, or Sean Connery? Yeah, I mean, that feels difficult with Nicolas Cage because he was pretty much playing the character he plays in every film with Nicolas Cage. But so that's a bit of a strange one there. We do also have I'm trying to think of the other bits as we start to go through the film, because once they start to get into dealing with the response and process, again, loads of people, there's no protective equipment anywhere on that island. That is deeply annoying. But moving on from that component, there is wonderful moment where Nicolas Cage decides he's going to have one of these incredibly breakable glass vials, which, when they just dropped on a room that was specifically designed for the storage of chemical weapons, so you would think, I don't know, might have some matting down, it killed someone. He's not only going to take one of these and drop it, he's also going to put it in his top pocket.
That was amazing. But of course, the reason he did that was because I think at this point, the audience hadn't seen anyone's face melt for ages. And so the second he took that, you were like, oh, someone's getting this. This is going to happen. It has to happen because it's got to happen. And then it does happen.
Yeah.
And of course, he pushes the ball into the guy's mouth and then he breaks it with his teeth. And then, of course, doesn't end well for him. Fair enough.
It does not. It does not. Because everyone knows that if you put a ball of nerve agent into someone's mouth, that the outside of their face will start to melt off, because that's how chemicals work. It's Schrodinger's VX, or it's quantum uncertainty VX, in that it can simultaneously exist in different locations at the same time, even though it's actually inside the mouth. You, like me this morning, may well have made a cup of coffee for yourself that was too hot. And then drinking it, you realised you were starting to scald your face. It was a little bit surreal there, in terms of, and then how long he then had, because having done that, he took a bit of a while to have a think about, better get me that heart injection to get this one sorted out.
And you get a very short clip of him basically being a pretty bad way, but it's okay because he's got atropine, so it's fine. Like, that was the thing as well. So it's good. We assume he'd been splashed by quite a bit of his stuff. His face and hands didn't start melting.
Guy was stood over him and spat out a load of VX all over him. But, not only did his face not melt, he was then also able to have a little lie down while he thought about it, and then jab the needle into his heart. Now, again, I feel like, there's some guest throw out questions here to the audience of doctors that have had to do injections into hearts. They go, how, is that the sort of thing where you do a bit of a wince face and like, oh, that's okay now though. Because I'm imagining that it's probably a bit messier or a bit problematic. But you're not going to get like that. Those needles look tiny. I have seen people talk about needles that have to go through the chest, where they look properly sizable needles to be able to try and get through there.
So I read about a little bit about the film, and so surprisingly, there were a few things in the film which were actually quite accurate, in as much as they predicted what would happen in the future or what might be unearthed in the future. Unsurprisingly, that had little to do with VX, however. So one of the things that came out in the film, they were walking around the bowels of Alcatraz, and he turns to Sean Connery, starts giving this guiding tour, which really pisses him off, because he's like worried about getting murdered. But he's like, oh, did you know the Civil War fought, or there's all these secrets? And actually, after filming, they retrospected when some of his archaeologists were actually there and found additional Civil War tunnels and stuff under Alcatraz from the fort. So that, in that bit was actually quite, it did predict something that did actually happen. It came true in the future. Yeah. But that was it. There was literally nothing out in that film that was accurate at all. Nothing.
No. And the actually, you have reminded me now as well of they talk about I can't remember whether this is in the War Room now or whether this is Nicolas Cage trying to terrify Sean Connery, where he talks about the effects of being exposed to nerve agent. And he does the classic mistake, which is to talk about paralysis and suggests that the nerve agent causes paralysis, which, to be honest, if you're getting into the sorts of the like minutiae of the types of symptoms, it's perhaps a little unfair, but obviously that's not what happens. What happens is you, particularly the external limbs, you are removing the ability to stop them spasming, and the paralysis occurs because of exhaustion of the muscles, not because they've stopped. I can never remember which way round that's described, but there's a particular term for it anyway, which medics will shout all about me, but it's actually sort of doing the opposite of what they're saying, which is causing fitting, which is then bizarre because all of the things which they describe in terms of what the symptoms are not what happens when anyone's exposed to it as well. Because when he describes the symptoms, he doesn't include face melting. So you would have thought that the opportunity to have at least been internally consistent would have been to say, yes, if you're exposed to about a gram of this, your face starts to melt off. None of us are really certain why that happens.
So I think we've done a reasonable job. We'll obviously remember stuff we've missed, and other people, as you say. I mean, I know there's a lot of people with views on this film. And I mentioned this film was being, and then cruelly put your face on a poster to advertise it.
With a
quite
fake
a few
nose.
people have got in contact.
Yeah,
the nose is fake.
AI'd my nose.
I just found it on the internet. The few people have got in contact, and I'm sure we'll have people coming in talk about it. So please do either on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. But before we end today, let's talk a little bit about what I'd like to talk about would be some of the other films so we're currently lining up future guests, and some ones in the mix currently are things like Omega Man, which we're going to do, which is I Am Legend. That series is a book, a couple of films, 3 films actually. So we're going to be doing that one, and there's some other ones we might be doing as well. But in terms of the CBR repertoire that is out there, what other ones do you particularly either enjoy or see as a kind of guilty pleasure?
Well, I mean, there's just so many. And weirdly, it's one of those things where you start to realize that there's been a period of cinema, particularly in the sort of 90s and noughties.
Yeah, that's right.
And going on, where everyone's favorite weapon is a chemical weapon to include in it. So, and often we just completely forget that that's the weapon in the film. So, Triple X, I can't remember if it's Triple X or Triple X to the next level. The weapon that he's defeating there is a binary nerve agent that makes people's faces melt, which feels like a wonderful homage to The Rock. So clearly, because it's also Triple X, that's a guilty pleasure. I'm often, although I like it in films, there's quite a lot of TV series where I quite enjoy the fact that they've sort of thrown in we think they're using ricin, or they're putting together a weapon with sarin. So Dexter has got, again, as I was sort of having a bit of a nose around to see where the trope of binary chemical weapons are, Dexter has one where they're doing a sort of binary chemical weapon as well, which again you would normally think. And of course, 24, I think, has had multiple chemical weapons within it. That's a sort of classic trope all the way through it. So, what if Jack Bauer has yet? I mean, that'd be my next one.
So I guess I might actually put this on a graph. I suspect that the higher grossing the film, the least relation it will have to any technical accuracy. I think that might potentially be something that we could plot. And so as we go on, we may even start bringing in an accuracy rating system. Yeah. So if I was to put you on the spot right now and say out of 100 for technical accuracy, where would you place this film, with 100 being basically a academic or historical
Perfect.
documentary? Well,
peer-reviewed.
Yes.
Well referenced. Inline citations.
And 0, because 0 could actually be The Rock, right? Oh, we could also, at this point, you could, if you were so inclined, we could put this at the other end. But do you think 0 is perhaps too unfair? Is it a revise and resubmit rather than a 0, do you think?
I think I'm going to say 5, purely because the concept that special forces or combat troops would go into a CBRN mission without having actually packed their PPE. That is probably the most realistic bit of the whole thing, because they need constant reminding. So it got that bit, I'd say, and Vix and Sarin are things. So I'd give it more than 0. But really, after then, pretty much everything goes on. But a little bit like the game Mastermind, you've got to be impressed in some ways that sometimes the best answer is to manage to get absolutely everything wrong. And a friend of mine said recently when I was sort of talking about coming to do this bit and the errors in films, I said, well, you've got to understand, Steve, that the excuse that anyone in the film industry can give when people say, well, that's technically very inaccurate about CBRN, is they can go, well, we don't want to proliferate the knowledge about it. So the line they use, well, we don't want to be too realistic because, that might actually sort of give away too much information. But they're completely okay to use the attack types. That being said, I don't think anyone has sort of critiqued a war film before for going, well, the thing about Bridge Too Far is that has totally informed, Russian styles of military warfare because they've looked at what happened. And we were just too technically accurate about how armoured formations move and the value of airborne operations. It's like clearly it didn't work there. I think it's a 5.
Five. Well, thank you very much for that, Steve. As ever, I've got a lot out of that. In particular, I sometimes come into these films and think people have been a bit, first of all, obviously it's always a bit unfair talking about a film in this way, and we do it not critically. The film really is just an excuse to talk about these things in the way that people are familiar with. It's a bridge, different issues. But in this case, I don't feel particularly too harsh.
It's a Michael Bay film. Yep, absolutely unapologetically, and I feel like you should link to the epic rap battle a bit within there because his descriptions of, and clearly in order to keep this unbleeped, his descriptions as a pastiche maker, and I do not care about critics or technical accuracy. I'm busy working on the sequel, and that, in my mind, is the only weird thing about The Rock, which is, where's The Rock 2? I know.
Yes. Where is The Rock 2?
Yeah, because everything else that sort of Michael Bay does usually is sequelized, although that's sort of at the start of it.
If we made that again now, I assume it'd be some sort of AI drone swarm weapon of doom or something now. I think we're going to do a new version of it. It'd have to be something the army possessed if they're going to try and stick to their original, the format of before.
I know. This is the trouble with though, and I feel like, and I hope you have someone who does obviously James Bond because the nano attacks. I like to think that we can pull that within the CBRN sphere, but that is, releasing a weapon that then instantly is around everyone.
Yeah, Steve, we're doing zombie films, so I mean, I've made my peace with that. Well, thanks very much for that. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to continuing to follow in your work. Of course, you can find Steve in all the normal places, as abnormal as Twitter has become, and also on LinkedIn. Just to reiterate, of course, everything we've talked about today, these are Steve's meandering personal opinions. This is a non-scripted show. We do not aim technical accuracy in this episode as we do aspire to in the other ones. And I do hope it's been a nice kind of tonic to some of the other shows we've done, and a sort of a tour around a film which, regardless of technical accuracy, has continued to be a touch point in introductory presentations to CBRN students around the world.
Thanks, bro.